I'm Katie Atwell, co-host of the EduGals podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Coming up on episode 224 of the House of EdTech, I'm going to talk about community. I'm going to give you a recommendation that'll help you take PowerPoint to the next level. Yes, you heard me right, PowerPoint. And I want to welcome you to another office hours edition of the podcast, and I'm going to do some more podcasting Q&A. Strike up the band. Welcome to the House of EdTech. My name is Chris Nessie. The House of EdTech launched in 2014, giving me the opportunity to speak with teachers, leaders, and creators so you can more effectively integrate technology, strengthen your pedagogy, and have more confidence in your classroom and school so you can make an impact. Get involved with the podcast by visiting my website, chrisnessie.com. Using technology isn't difficult, and this is where it begins. This is the House of EdTech. And I'm very excited that you're here for another episode of the show. If you're a new listener, welcome aboard. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. Very excited for today's episode. These episodes are fun to do because I like talking about podcasting. It's kind of my niche and my thing, and I do it a lot. In case you didn't realize this, I podcast every single school day through the podcast club I have at my school. We do a morning show, and that's kind of going to come up later in today's episode. But I just love podcasting, and from time to time, I think it's important to answer questions that I find about podcasting. And there are a lot of resources that you can go to learn about podcasting for yourself or for your students. And I just have some things that I wanted to share in this episode and answer some questions. I've got some listeners who sent in some questions, and I'm going to address those. So this is going to be a very fun episode. If you're not interested in podcasting, I think you should listen anyway, because it's fun, and you never know when you might turn that corner. And if you've already turned that corner, then hey, let me know what your podcast is and what you're podcasting about with your students. All right. Let's get into what I'm going to do. Let's do the EdTech Thought, and I'm going to talk a little bit about community and a very special announcement. For this episode's EdTech Thought, I want to share my thoughts on something I think is very important, and that is the power of community. As educators, we begin our careers on what is presented to us as this noble journey. You know, we're guiding young minds, we're shaping the future, and we're inspiring a thirst for knowledge. But let me ask you the following. Who guides us? Who nurtures your growth, your personal development, your professional development? It's in these moments of reflection that we realize the significance of building and being a part of a community. A community is not just a group of individuals. It's a support system. It's a collection of shared experiences and ideas. It's a place where we can find comfort during the challenging times, as well as being able to celebrate our triumphs together. In a community, we can discover that we are not alone in our struggles, our triumphs, or our aspirations. Building a community for educators creates a sanctuary, a place where we can exchange knowledge, where we can share best practices, and we can collaborate on innovative ideas. It is within these communities that we find encouragement, inspiration, and the fuel to begin striving for excellence in our classrooms. This podcast is something I have been working since day one to build community around. You're a part of this House of EdTech community as a listener, and I thank you for that. And I want to invite you to the House of EdTech Discord, But before I do that, I had alluded to this prior to the release of this episode that I had a special announcement. And this is going to be the first of two major announcements in this episode. All right. But first, I want you to get ready for an incredible networking event that will involve sharing the knowledge and mouth-watering cheesesteaks. That's right. The House of EdTech and the Education Podcast Network, we are again going to be live at ISTE here in 2023 for the Cheesesteak Meetup. I want you to join me and other educators and education podcasters and listeners on Tuesday, June 27th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. for cheesesteaks, networking, and fun. Let's come together at the iconic Campos, just a stone's throw away from the Pennsylvania Convention Center. This meetup promises to bring together podcasters like myself, avid listeners like you from all corners of the education world. Whether you're an established podcaster or an enthusiastic listener, I want you at this meetup if you're going to be at ISTE this June. I want you to immerse yourself in engaging conversations. I want you to connect with people, shake hands, swap manly stories, and I want you to collaborate and talk to each other about potential future projects. That's not all. Again, as the organizer of this and as an extra special treat, I want to let you know that if you are wearing a House of EdTech t-shirt to the meetup, your cheesesteak is on me. Yes, you heard that right. You wear a House of EdTech t-shirt to the meetup, and I am buying your cheesesteak to show you my appreciation for your support of this podcast, and just because I think that's the nice and right thing to do. It is as simple as that. So I don't want you to miss out on this opportunity to connect with me if we've never met face-to-face, or there are other education podcasters you want to connect with. Let them know about the meetup. I will spread the word as far and as wide as I'm able to, tell other listeners, and I want you to come and enjoy some cheesesteaks and root beer with me. So mark your calendars, June 27th, 5:30 p.m. We're going to be at Campos Cheesesteaks, and that's on 214 Market Street, which is just a few blocks from the Pennsylvania Convention Center. I can't wait to meet you and celebrate ISTE and summer and the House of EdTech and podcasting with you. But I would like you to RSVP. So go to chrisnessy.com/meetup. chrisnessy.com/meetup. That link will be in the show notes, and it's also a swipe or a tap away inside of your podcast player. Come be a part of the community. And if you're not going to be at ISTE, but you still want to connect, go to chrisnessy.com/discord. That's DISCORD, and join the Discord community where we can connect and chat wherever you are. And that's my EdTech Thought. And now for the EdTech recommendation for episode 224. Today I want to share something that's quickly becoming a game changer. The tool is called ClassPoint. ClassPoint is an all-in-one solution that integrates directly with Microsoft PowerPoint. Now, what makes ClassPoint different is how it enhances your existing PowerPoint presentations. It can save you time from juggling between various apps during your lessons by adding advanced annotation and presentation tools right inside of PowerPoint. This means you get features like inking tools, whiteboard slides, and even the ability to search the web right from your presentation. Yes, it's as convenient as it sounds. But where ClassPoint truly shines is its interactivity. It can transform your slides into interactive quizzes, collecting real-time responses from your students. It even introduces a gamified element with what they call star rewards, which has been a hit with many teachers and students. It's not just about them passively receiving information anymore. Students are actively participating, answering questions, and earning rewards. The best part? They can join via the ClassPoint app or any web browser, making it incredibly accessible for all students and learners. ClassPoint takes PowerPoint from being a basic presentation tool to a dynamic, interactive teaching platform. If you're looking to enhance your digital lessons and boost engagement, give it a try. Let me know what you think. If you're already using ClassPoint, I want to hear from you as well and hear about your successes and maybe anything that you've struggled with. Send an email to feedback@chrisnessy.com. And if you want to check it out, go to their website, ClassPoint.io. And that's my recommendation. All right, let's dive into the featured content for this episode, which is some podcasting question and answers. First, the number one resource that I have for you, and it's totally free. It's just a web address. I don't need your email. You don't have to pay for it. Go to chrisnessy.com/school podcast. chrisnessy.com/school podcast. On that page, I have previous episodes of the show where I did a how-to podcast miniseries, which was all the way back in episodes 96, 97, and 98. Why you should podcast, you want a podcast now what, and how to create a podcast. And so much of that information is still relevant today, and a lot of that information is still exactly how I make this very podcast. I have some other episodes available as well, bringing podcasts into my classroom, starting a school podcast, podcasting easy with Podcastle.ai, start a school podcast club or a network, and lessons I've learned from podcasting at school. And I've got some blog post articles that link there, so I can't say enough here, and it's a swipe or a tap away, chrisnessy.com/school podcast. I'm not going to get into the microphones and the software. So these are, in this episode, some bigger idea questions, okay, that I want to address. And a bunch of them came from a listener of the podcast all the way in Brazil. Well, if you're also listening in Brazil, then it's not all the way in Brazil, but from where I sit here in New Jersey, all the way from Brazil, Leo Calbush has sent me a bunch of questions. So I'm going to tackle these one at a time. So first, Leo asks, what are the benefits of podcasting in school? Well, Leo, and you who is also listening, podcasting in school is, in my opinion, the ragu of education. All right. Now, I'll be honest, podcasting is one way to present information for entertaining, for teaching, for laughing, any of those things. All right. So to have students create podcast content is a great medium for students to express their understanding or knowledge around a topic. Okay. What are the benefits? It is not just sitting down and recording audio. Okay. Creating a podcast is the technical aspect, from recording and editing audio to graphic design, web design. There's writing, there's research. So there's a lot, which is why I go with ragu as my analogy. You know, it's the sauce with everything in it. Although, let's be honest, ragu isn't great. You got to make it yourself. That's just me as a New Jersey Italian. Okay. Leo's next question. How does podcasting contribute to students' development and improvement in different subjects? Well, if students are able to talk about what they're learning and they are able to talk about what they understand, then that can help them develop. Being able to talk about something is a clear sign that you understand something or that you know what you're talking about. Okay. So the more we can get students to talk about their learning, whether it's in math, science, social studies, phys ed, health, okay, art, okay, it doesn't matter the subject, because in podcasting in general, there can be a podcast, and there are podcasts about every single topic that's out there. You can find a podcast for just about anything. And when we talk about student development, it's a great opportunity to start to get them comfortable talking to a larger audience than just the teacher, their peers in the classroom, or their families, because the potential is there for a podcast and audio content to be global and to spread to ears far and wide. Look at the very House of EdTech you're listening to. I'm answering a question from Leo, who's from Brazil and reached out to me on Instagram, at House of EdTech, if you're not following me on Instagram. Leo also asks, How does it enhance their communication and social skills? It kind of goes without saying, but this medium is all about communication, verbal articulation, and expressing one's thoughts and ideas and point of view and perspectives. If I go back to benefits, okay, podcasting is and can be for everybody. Okay, everybody has a unique perspective and point of view on the world. And whatever your thing is, students can be podcasting about it. You can be podcasting about it. He also asked, does it help them become more organized? Honestly, Leo, I don't know if podcasting helps people become more organized, but I can't say that it can't. I mean, it certainly can. Planning this episode, right? Creating an outline, creating notes, sourcing questions, sitting down and doing the research on, the recommendation and, organizing it in the place where I do my outlines. Certainly that helps me get organized. And certainly, when I want to create an episode, I need to think about the beginning, the middle, and the end. So I think that yes, it can. Is it a guarantee it's going to help them get organized? I don't know, because you could still have the very unorganized student who, would forget their head if it wasn't screwed on, but they could still podcast. Maybe it'll help a little bit with how they get organized. Leo also wants to know, and he's curious about student engagement and commitment. All right. The honest truth here is you will have some students who are into this, and you will have some students who could care less, and it's not going to be interesting to them. They're going to think it's just another thing that their teacher is asking them to do, and that can happen at any grade level, right? I've experienced that. I've got the podcast club at my school, but I also do some podcasting in my classroom within the world history curriculum, and some kids get into it, and some kids could care less. So I think it depends on the student. And it's like anything, and this is my whole philosophy on, say, social studies, for example. I can't make you love history. I can't make a student love podcasting. I can only show them some skills and give them the experience and empower them to make their own decision about if it's something they'd ever want to do or be a part of in the future. Leo also wants to know, what do they learn and what skills do they develop or improve by podcasting? Again, everything. Reading, writing, researching. It is critical thinking. You have to plan. So again, podcasting is the ragu. And Leo's final question, can you provide some guidance on how to distribute a podcast on major platforms such as Apple, Google, and Spotify? Okay, so Apple is the big elephant in the room. Once you submit a podcast to the Apple Podcast Directory, there are hundreds of other podcasting apps that draw on that Apple Podcast Directory. So once you get into Apple and you go to podcasts. Let me look this up real quick. Podcast Connect. Let's see. I'm doing this live. Why not? Go to podcasts with an S, connect.apple.com. And if you want to submit your podcast or a student podcast to the Apple directory, that's where you do it. And I will include a link to this in the show notes out at chrisnessy.com/224. But it's podcasts with an S, connect.apple.com. And once you submit a podcast there, you'll grab your RSS feed from Libsyn or Blueberry, or if you're using Spotify for podcasters, formerly known as Anchor. Once you get that RSS feed, that's what you're submitting to Apple. And that's all you need to do. Then wherever you're hosting your podcast, you upload your podcast episodes as you create them, and then Apple Podcasts will look at that RSS feed. It's kind of like your radio signal if you're a radio station, and when there's something new there, it'll get distributed to the people who are following your podcast. For Google and Spotify, you have to manually submit, and I will include the special links to Google and Spotify for manually submitting to those two directories, and then you are off and running. But the big one you want to get into is Apple Podcasts. Leo, I want to thank you for submitting your questions. You did so on Instagram, and let me know if I can share your Instagram here on the podcast. I don't want to just give out your Instagram here without your permission. So just let me know when you hear this, if I can let people know how to connect with you on Instagram. My next listener question comes from Mike Brilla. Mike is another good podcasting friend of mine. He might very well be at the cheesesteak meetup at ISTE. You never know. Mike, I hope you're there. Certainly would love to shake hands and break cheesesteak bread with you. But Mike asks, how regularly do you meet with your podcasting club at school? Well, I meet every day. Every day that we have school, we do a morning show, okay? Then once a week, at least, we try to do the afternoon show, and I am always looking for kids who want to be a part of either the morning show or to stay that one day after school. I was actually able to this past, here in the, the spring semester of 2023, January through May, there was that second day that I'd stayed after school, and we're producing an all-Spanish podcast called Sazón Latino, and that is hosted by members of the Hispanic Culture Club at the high school that I work at, and I'll include a link to this in the show notes. But if you go to zebrapodcastnetwork.com, you can check out the Zebra Morning Show, which we live stream on YouTube and release as a podcast. You could check out Zebra Drive Time, which is currently, if you go look, we're looking for new hosts for that program. And we've got Sazón Latino, which is all Spanish. So definitely check those out. But I meet every day with at least the morning show. So that's a ton of fun. Go check it out. It's a lot of fun. Shout outs to Adrian and Julian, the morning show co-hosts. Okay. Thank you to Leo. Thank you to Mike for submitting your questions. Going back to, for just a second, let me take a tangent. The idea of community that I talked about. I'm begging and pleading with you who is listening that when I ask for people to reach out and submit stuff, please take me up on that. All right. Again, if I'm trying to build community around the podcast, send me messages, send me an email at the minimum with questions, comments, feedback at chrisnessy.com. Or if you go to the website, you can send a voice message. Okay. Definitely want you to get more involved with the show. All right. Now I got a couple questions here that I do want to address. Okay. And I sourced these from various places and kind of assembled them into a good question format. All right. How can I introduce the concept of podcasting to students who might be unfamiliar with it? Okay. 1, use podcasts as a teaching tool. Provide podcasts that are relevant, specific episodes to the content that you teach. And you could assign students to listen to it. You could have listening groups. You could have a listening club, right? So start to integrate audio-based content into your teaching, and that will help students be familiar with it, okay? One that I strongly recommend that's appropriate for any age group and covers so many topics is Everything Everywhere Daily, all right? AJ Bianco and I recently, on an episode of Podcast PD, had the host Gary on an episode of Podcast PD, and it was a great conversation about teaching with podcasts, okay? I will put a link to that in the show notes, but if you go to podcastpd.com/127, that's where you can find that episode and conversation, Teaching with Podcasts, where we had a conversation with Gary, the host of Everything Everywhere Daily. But you got to start to bring audio content into your classes. Next question. What are some engaging topics or themes that students can explore in their own podcast episodes? That's easy. Whatever is interesting to your students, that's what you should encourage them to podcast about, right? For me, it's education technology, it's the Yankees, it's doing the morning show and having that fun and dynamic conversation with students. It's the joke podcast with my son, Miles. So ask your students what they'd like to talk about. What are they passionate about? What are their hobbies? What are their interests? Start there, right? So many assignments we give students in school, they are just not interested in. They have no desire to be interested in the topic, or they're not curious about it. Take advantage of them in this way. Let them talk about what they're interested in and what they are truly curious about. Give them that opportunity. What are the roles that students can take on in production of a podcast? They could be the host. They could be the scriptwriter. They could be the audio editor. They could just go get sound. Maybe you teach your students how to do a narrative style podcast or a storytelling type podcast where they've got to do sound effects and, they've got to get creative with audio. Okay. again, there are so many roles: graphic design, web design, the host, producer. There are so many things, social media and marketing, right? You can have students who are promoting the show, all right, getting the word out there. So those are just some of the roles that kids can take on in student podcasts. Next question. How can we ensure that student podcasts are appropriate and safe for sharing? You got to listen to them, okay? You got to do some quality control, right? I am blessed that I have two extraordinary young people, again, in Adrian and Julian, that we do the morning show. And my only rule on the morning show is you can't curse, and the topics that we talk about have to be school appropriate, okay? So if one or both of them do something that's, high school kid type fun out on the weekend, we don't bring that into the on-air portion of the podcast, okay? So you got to kind of set the expectation for your students and let them know what's appropriate and what's not. Now, if they take the tools and they go make their own show, then they are using the tools the way they want to. But anything that is school endorsed or your class endorsed, right, you just want to make sure that it is appropriate. And the nice thing about podcasts, and I've been saying this for years, is because it's audio, it should be much more shareable than to put kids on video. Because in the audio, you can't see them. They can use pseudonyms, so they don't even have to use their real names. It doesn't matter. So you can certainly do a lot more and share a lot more with student podcasts. All right, 2 more questions. The next one, though. How can we involve parents and the wider school community in our podcasting project? Well, you got to share it with them, get them to promote it. So maybe it's on your school webpage, maybe you're posting episodes to your Google Classroom, depending on the age group. Again, you don't have to necessarily get it into Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google. Maybe, if you're a director of curriculum and you want to bring podcasting into your school district, you say, all right, in grades K through 4, we're only putting these audio files on Google Drive and we're sharing them in the closed environment that is Google Classroom, or sending links to parents via email, and we're not widely distributing them to a global audience. But then maybe in middle and high school, you start to expand the boundaries that students are reaching. And maybe you start to bring in community guests. Although having first and second graders and any grade level student interviewing or having conversations with people who are part of their community is so valuable for, again, if we go back to Leo's questions, developing communication skills and social skills, all right? Get kids talking to more and different kinds of people, okay? And our last question that I will address in this edition of Podcasting Q&A is, can you provide examples of successful student-led podcasts or podcasting projects in schools? Very simple, one link, zebrapodcastnetwork.com. Go check out what I'm doing over there, what my kids are doing over there at the school that I teach at, and let me know what you think. If you have questions, happy to get on a call with you and talk podcasting or how you can do something similar at your school or in your district. And again, the number one resource I can direct you to that I offer is chrisnessy.com/school podcast. That's going to have this episode there shortly after I post it. And it's also got links to software, hardware. Certainly that's a good way to support the podcast. If you buy anything through my affiliate links for the different sites. So definitely check that out. And also reach out to other podcasters that you know. Okay. And I'm sorry if you're listening to podcasts that have no desire to interact with you, but I do want to interact with you. Okay. So send me an email, feedback@chrisnessy.com, or you could send me a voicemail and life will be good. I want to thank you for listening to this edition of Office Hours, More Podcasting Q&A. Thanks for listening to this episode of the House of EdTech podcast. Show notes are a swipe or a tap away in the app you're listening in, or go out to chrisnessy.com/224. That's how you're going to get the most value out of the show. Everything's out in the show notes. I love hearing from my listeners, and I want your feedback and your perspectives. Because Leo reached out, Mike reached out with questions for this episode, so if you've got questions, I could make entire episodes that revolve around your questions, or it'll give me a little something to talk about within an episode. Feel free to send me an email or a voicemail. The email address is feedback@chrisnessy.com, or go to chrisnessy.com/voicemail. And your input helps me create better content for the show. If you know someone who might benefit from the podcast, share it with them. Right now in your little app, share it out on Twitter, share it to Instagram, share this episode. Let's go! Also, if you're getting value from the show, whether it's this episode and you're a first-time listener, or you've been listening for many years and you want to give back to the show, consider becoming an awesome supporter. I'm very thankful for Jeff Herb, Peggy George, Dan Gallagher, Mike Messner, Matt Miller, Brian Carpenter, and Aaron Cummings. If you get value from the show, go to chrisnessy.com/awesome. I have a goal to make this podcast entirely listener supported, so that way I don't have to solicit advertisers and ads for the podcast. So if you want to help make that a reality, become the next awesome supporter, and I'll be happy to give you a shout out here on the podcast each and every episode. Go to chrisnessy.com/awesome. The next episode of the show is going to be episode number 225, and I think my goal is to release this on May 28th, because I still want to make sure you get 2 episodes here in the month of May. So look for the next episode a week from today on May 28th. What I'm going to talk about? You'll have to tune in, but that'll be in episode 225. As I said at the top of the episode, I have another announcement, and this is a different look for the podcast. This summer, for July and August 2023, I am going to go on a hiatus. I'm going to release an episode after ISTE, and then I will come back in September. I got a lot going on this summer, and I have to give my full attention to what I'm doing this summer. But don't worry, there's a whole back catalog of stuff to listen to, so I hope you do that as well. And I'll remind you again after ISTE. Until next time, thanks for learning with me, and remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. Hey, real quick, don't forget, if you're going to be in Philly for ISTE, go RSVP for the cheesesteak meetup, chrisnessy.com/meetup. See you next time.